I've been diagnosed with schizophrenia. But let me tell you about the dog. I created this to tell you about what I see and hear. Feel free to ask any questions. I've been diagnosed with schizophrenia. I have symptoms, hallucinations, but my brain scan MRIs don't show anything, and I generally puzzle my psychiatrist. I'm not supposed to draw the dog anymore, though. There is a dog. It started following me around campus my freshman year at university, where I studied design, specifically fine art and illustration. I'd see it around the corners of buildings, or from a distance. That first semester, it just got closer. The first few weeks, I didn't think it was there, or couldn't really see it. But it got closer. It would follow me. Now, the dog isn't really there, my doctor says. No dogs are there. The dog is about the size of a small to medium schnauzer. It's got black fur, and someone has skinned its face and head. The skin hangs in wet, gloppy, dangly strips around its neck. It can't blink, and I don't know how it eats without lips. It stares at me and other people with those bulging, exposed eyeballs, and licks its twitchy, sinewy snout. I'd feel bad for it if it weren't for the hands. The dog doesn't have paws. Not a single paw. It has 4 human hands for feet. Even if I can ignore it and not look at it, like my doctor says to do, I can still hear the slapping, pat, pat, pat noise of those hands as it trots along beside me through the tiled halls. I crawl up high into my loft bed to escape it, but it paces. All night I hear the pat, pat, pat of those hands. Sometimes it looks at me with those terrible eyes, and I swear to God, it looks like it wants to talk. At night, it would move its mouth when I looked down from my loft, like talking. But the dog has never made a sound, except for the pat, pat, pat of its hands. It doesn't cry like an injured dog would, and it doesn't bark. I still think it has something to say. I don't know why it follows me. Nobody else sees or hears it. Or maybe it just has something to say to me. But in those cold, dark, lonely moments when I'm alone with it, and it's moving its silent, mutilated mouth, I feel a great fear. I do not want to know what it has to say to me. I really wish it would go away. My psychiatrist said we're going to try a different medication since the Seroquel XR doesn't keep the dog away. I just hope the new meds don't open its voice.
Number 2.
Around the tender age of 11, I was diagnosed with schizophrenia. My parents attempted to convince me that it wasn't bad, and that I would still be a normal kid. But as years went by, I grew more and more distant from my parents, living in a solitary world. I would talk to myself, sometimes resulting to self-harm to kill the voices. I was resented by man and beast alike. The world had transformed to a seemingly endless tunnel of hate and darkness. That was until I met him. The voice in my head was always a dark, raspy voice. It spoke like the devil. And if the day were to come that I needed to identify the voice, I could do it anywhere. To my utmost surprise, that day came yesterday, introducing itself in the form of an ugly rainy day. Due to my situation of not having a car, the bus was my main form of transportation. It was almost 5 p.m, and I was walking home from the store when it began to rain. I instinctively headed to the nearest bus stop, catching it with ease. The bus, fortunately, was nearly empty, which was odd for this time of day, and I rode alone until we pulled onto another stop. A single man stepped on. He wore a hood, baggy jeans, and despite all the empty seats around on the bus, he chose to sit next to me. He sat uncomfortably close and didn't remove his hoodie. We rode, and we were approaching my stop. We rode the whole ride in silence. Finally, we pulled up, and I politely asked the man to move so that I could get out. He moved and I walked past him, and then he clasped onto my shoulder, and then he whispered some words into my ear that froze me in my step.
You have a nice house.
You have to understand, the bus doesn't drop me off at my house. It drops me off 2 blocks away and I have to walk. And I live decently deep in the neighbourhood. That was scary enough. The sound of his voice is what made me rush home and lock my doors. He spoke with a deep, raspy voice. He spoke like the devil. He stared at me as I scurried off the bus, in the rain, and into my small apartment. I locked my door sitting in the silence of my living room. I decided to stay up late last night, keeping watch for the man. It was around midnight, and I started dozing off, and then my phone vibrated on my lap. I picked it up. It was from a number that I didn't have registered, or identify the area code. I was cautious and then opened the message. I opened it, and instantly regretted it. The contents of the message were chilling. It was a picture of the back of a chair. The chair that I was sitting in. The back of my head was visible, and I was able to conclude that this picture was taken right now. I spun around the chair, falling to my knees as the voice in my head became extremely loud. It was almost like someone was screaming in my ear, but I managed to pick up my phone and dial 911. They promptly arrived and I showed them the picture. They stared at the picture and handed the phone back to me, saying they would stake a man on my block. I thanked the officer and closed the door. The voices became increasingly louder as I attempted to sleep last night, and eventually managed to doze off for about 5 hours. I only wished that I had not. I awoke to a loud bang on my door, and blood on my sheets. My wrist had been cut severely, and polarized pictures hung on my wall. I stumbled around out of bed, and picked off one of the pictures and quickly realized that they were all of me. All of me sleeping. The banging on my door continued, and as I approached the door cautiously, peering through the peephole, I saw no one was on the other end. Where is this banging coming from? Is it coming from my head? I've been sitting in my garage typing this, searching for the right words to use. More pictures have appeared in my room, and I don't know where they're coming from. The officer on my block is now dead. The banging is still going on. I just don't know what to do anymore.
Number 3.
When I met Robert, I was 23 with a fresh bachelor's degree in architecture and a 3-year-old to another man. But for some reason, he accepted me regardless of the small details and the fact that I was an overachiever and he was simply not. Likewise, because in an overactive life full of outside stresses, Robert was able to keep my life calm and happy. You would think this would be an impossible feat if you knew what ailed him, but early on, I realized that he was a perfectly normal person with perfectly normal emotions, even if he did require a bit more work. You see, Robert was schizophrenic. The first 2 weeks of our non-stop dates, he hadn't said anything, but when we became more comfortable and over a few drinks, I opened up to him about the nonsense that plagued my family. Unnecessary drama and drug problems. He wasn't so afraid to face me with the truth any longer. Our relationship changed into a compassionate type ordeal where we both held each other up in the worst of times and made each other feel the utmost happiness. I guess he was expecting me to blow up and give him the typical round of, "So in other words, you're crazy." But everybody functions on a different level, and even I knew this. He taught me the ways of the madness, and we found ourselves being able to joke about it, just as I joked about my own issues, and the fact that I was basically raised by a female monster and a drug lord father. It was life. Life is made of joking and general discomfort. About a month into our relationship, Robert uncomfortably approached me over a glass of wine and asked if I would like to go to one of his therapy sessions. He went to talk to somebody twice a month, a nice doctor by the name of Dr. Jones, and he wanted me to aid him there since I was always persisting him to tell him about his high-functioning schizophrenia and clue me into his mind. To say the least, it was a very interesting day. Upon our meeting, I discovered the triggers that most disrupted Robert's timid lifestyle. His schizophrenia caused him slight delusions where he could mistake a person's face for another. He shyly admitted that a few times he woke up next to me on the couch after a nap and thought that I was, at first, his own mother, seeing as we had a similar body shape and hair color. I told him better her than an ex-girlfriend. He also had auditory issues, explaining further that loud sounds terrified him and caused him to hallucinate or become slightly hostile. We both agreed that it was a good thing that my daughter, Katie, was through the age of screaming her head off because she would probably bring a lot of aggravation to our new household. Our relationship was excelling quickly, and Dr. Jones concluded that in the future, if we decided to have children, certain medication could be taken that would lessen his symptoms greatly, but that since things were doing fine now, he should stay away from those. Robert had a decent life balance and seemed very peppy. Nothing like you would typically expect when you hear the word schizophrenia. Things continued to do well for a long time. Eventually, Robert moved in fully to our welcoming home, and Katie absolutely adored him, being there constantly. It was like having a father back in her life, but this time, a more understanding and plentiful one. One day, Katie approached us with her puppy dog eyes as she coincidentally asked for a puppy. We exchanged glances for a second. We knew the day would come where she asked for a pet of some sort, but it was an unspoken thing up until that time. By this point, Robert and I had been together for almost a year and a half with very few outbursts, and if there were any, they hadn't been centered around Katie and I. Robert was doing just fine and seemed to only ever improve. He absolutely loved us, and so he agreed that she should be allowed to have a pet. One day, when he was at work, I sat my daughter down and explained to her again that he had some issues with noise and that a puppy might not be the best idea, but she was persistent. Robert and I came home bearing Reynold, the golden retriever, a 1-year-old that an old friend from high school had put up for adoption to her social media list. I answered the ad, and soon he was ours. Promised to be good with a new 4-year-old who was more than happy to see him. Her eyes lit up, and she gave us the biggest hug ever. We were both content, at least for a few days. Reynolds seemed to fit right into our household, even if a little seemingly scared by his new surroundings. About the 4th night that he was home with us, he started the overprotective barking. Robert awoke with a shot and freaked the hell out, nearly jumping out of his bed. He had an attack and started screaming for his mother, and I had to basically hold his flailing arms to calm his beating heart. When he snapped out of it, he was completely pissed off that he couldn't get back to sleep. Reynolds slept in our room that night without another fuss. But sadly to my surprise, he erupted in a barking fit every night to follow, causing Robert to wake up in his hallucinations and end up furious at the dog. Robert talked about getting on the pills that he had been mentioned at the prior therapy session, but brushed it off when I would remind him that it would be a good idea to say something. He was getting sleep, just not as well as he could have. Things seemed to take a bit of a toll on him, and he was much more aggravated than usual. I let it go, and hoped that with some proper training, Reynold would grow out of things, but keeping in mind that dogs communicate by barking, and this wasn't something that he could really help. April 2nd, 2013. I came home from work, and something didn't feel right. From the outside of the house, all appeared normal, and Robert's car was parked in the driveway, so I knew that he had made it home from work and that Katie was back from the babysitter, as usual. I walked up to the door and could hear the screaming from the outside. I was in the house faster than a bat out of hell, racing around until I made it to the stairs where I almost tumbled down as I scurried and missed the first step. I heard the overbearing loud screams. "God damn it, Reynold! You can't shut the fuck up for 1 second! Was trying to take a fucking nap!" And then what sounded to be kicks to the dog's abdomen and the distinct crunching of bones. And as the bones cracked, I heard Katie scream, "Stop kicking me!" in the most brutally terrified and dying voice I had ever heard come out of a small child's mouth, like the life had been smacked out of her. When I made it to the bedroom, Robert's stern face fell into a depressing frown as he looked down at the broken little girl on the floor. The one he had mistaken for the dog he had grown to hate. Her skull had been kicked in. She was gone. Reynolds barked from the corner of the room, his tail wagging.